Thank you, staff. I'd like to call this regular council meeting of September 28, 2021 to order with adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Brooks Hill, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of September 14th, 2021. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. Business arising from the minutes. I actually have some business arising from those minutes. And we want to talk just a little bit about public hearings with the ministerial order M192 has allowed all meetings and public hearings to be conducted electronically during the COVID pandemic. The local government authority to hold electronic meetings under M192 will expire September 28th. Bill 10-2021 of the Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act will enact new legislation which allows municipal governments to hold meetings electronically and or have electronic participation. Should council wish to continue to hold electronically and or electronic participation, amendments to the City Council procedures bylaw are necessary. So we want to talk just a little bit about some of the new legislation and the challenges for the city. The greatest challenges will be with public hearings where a small handful of members of the public wish to be in attendance. So I don't know whether all of you got a little thing that Cindy had sent out regarding some options for us, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about it, which will give staff some guidance as to how we proceed. So in option one's an in-person council meeting. We'd hold it at the community center in the MP rooms with public in attendance and live streaming. And then we'll go through those options. Option two, in-person meeting, community center again with no live streaming. And then option three is kind of what we had talked about previously, a hybrid meeting, council and council chambers, staff and presenters attending electronically, public viewing electronically. So when we talk about the in-person meetings, we're able to secure the community center MP rooms, but we're allowed a maximum of 50 people in each room. So 50% of the capacity for the community center, but because we can section it off, we would have a portion of it open so people could walk through, they could speak, they could view. So we're kind of wondering what council feels that they would be comfortable with so that we can give some direction to staff, because our first public hearing will be on Wednesday, October 27th. And so I'm kind of wondering what any of you feel. So if you have your email, you would have these graphs, but I'll just talk a little bit about it. If we have option number one, which is like we did with the last one we were talking about Hay Road. Do you remember that? Where we had the public in attendance, people were also able to go online or call in, and were able to participate in person as well. Now there's some cost with all of these, and the cost with that is the electronics. We have to hire a company to come in live to help live stream, plus with sound. And then if we do no live streaming, of course, we wouldn't need to do that. However, our community has gotten used to live streaming. And I think we need to continue that ability to allow people, especially now, if they're not wanting or feeling comfortable or safe enough to come out, we need to continue the live streaming. So option number two, where there is no live streaming, is it fair to say all of you would be in agreement? We wouldn't do that one. We wouldn't have a live in person without live streaming.
Yes,
no?
That's right.
Okay, so option two is off the table then, Ms. Boyd, Ms. Rousseau. And then option three, hybrid meeting. So we would be here in our council chambers, staff and presenters would be attending electronically, and public viewing would be electronically. We would need to provide members of the public with a facility where they can hear and watch the proceedings so that they're able to see what's going on. And then we want to make sure that those who don't have access to technology can view the proceedings. However, a municipal officer must be present at that location, right? So we look at it, okay, doing some sort of electronic or hybrid sort of thing might be one way. My biggest concern is those who don't have access to electronics and feel that their interests are in peril or they need to speak, having that in-person context and still doing live streaming may be the best way. So I'm just wanting you, Councillor Brooks, help me.
So initially when we were talking about this, the major concern with is it option one, like we did last year with Hay Road, was that it was unclear where the pandemic might take us, which to some extent is still true. My impression is that things are unlikely to change drastically in the next month. So my preference has always been for that option one, but you know, I was persuaded that maybe option three was the more prudent choice because of the limits with advertising and such. If we started down the road towards option one and then suddenly we weren't allowed to do it due to health restrictions, then we'd have to abort it and start all over again with the restrictions. But right now I feel pretty comfortable going ahead with option one. I think that's the best choice. I think for the public especially, people are feeling relatively confident in going out, and I think that people are in person gonna feel heard the best. That we're not gonna, you know, there's always glitches with technology. We're not gonna go through a virtual public hearing and then the next day have all these emails being like, I tried to call in and I couldn't do it, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I think my preference is for option one.
Okay, Councillor Ryan, any comment?
No, I agree. I think that's the one that gives people the most option, or as many options. Yeah, I think especially with these types of topics, we don't want to risk getting into that situation where people don't feel like they've been heard.
Okay. Councillor Ollie.
I think what happened, the example set by the previous one where we did do both options, it was favorable. The response was good and it worked well for us, and I think the community felt like they had an opportunity to speak. Okay. And I think that would be the best pursuit for us.
Okay, appreciate that. Councillor Chalette, comment?
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, I agree with all the comments from my colleagues here. I think with the restrictions unlikely to change, knock on wood, it does seem to give a good opportunity for that in-person interaction, but then also with live streaming, making it more accessible to members of the public who might not be able to attend in person. I'm curious, I'm assuming that these costs are eligible to be covered by the COVID funds.
Yeah, they could come out of that. We're looking approximately $5,000 for each event, so it's not an expensive way to go.
Okay, and I'm curious as to the staff required to manage the flow of people in accordance with COVID gathering restrictions. Since we have so many public hearings in the list and in the works, would it be regular city staff that would be doing this work, or would we consider contracting a team potentially to help with this over those public hearings? Just to take I'm concerned about the capacity.
Ms. Floyd, I believe we would need our staff who understand how the public hearings go. Is that not correct?
Through your worship, I think that we could do it either way. It would probably be best for city staff to do it just because we have the background. However, if capacity was low, we could always bring a casual in or two to help facilitate it for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I just think we should consider having some supplemental staff to help you guys out with our staff in charge and guiding how things are going, but then just to help with the overload potentially if that's an issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, so I concur with option one, and also I think this is the obvious intent of the COVID funds for this kind of thing. And the details, I think staff can work out what's most prudent from staff perspective.
Great. Appreciate that. And I thank you also. Mr. Mattiussi, any comments?
No, I went through with Floyd this morning. Yeah, get the options and discussed it, and it's really in the best interest of the community, all the flexibility.
Great, thank you for that. Ms. Floyd, anything else that you would like us to discuss? So we basically have all agreed on option one with live streaming. Does that give you enough direction for you and our IT group to put things together for the future, knowing that we want to be consistent with all of our public hearings this fall?
Your Worship, I think that is sufficient. It would be nice for us to have a resolution to move forward, knowing that we will consider long-term solutions at a later date. But for now, it would be good to have a resolution that you want to go this route. And then we also need to determine a time that we spoke about earlier, whether we want to do it in the day or early afternoon, the evening, potentially something like the short-term rental public hearing could go over a long number of hours. So maybe a 4 or 5 o'clock start would allow people that are working to attend. Totally up to you guys.
Great. Okay, I'm going to discuss that briefly, and then we'll put a motion on the table. So this afternoon, spoke briefly with our IT, with Jay, and he's saying even if we had 100 people that uploaded a 2 or 3 minute thing, and we had everybody speaking that way, or a lot of people speaking that way, we're still looking at 45 hours of an event just without people speaking live. So I want all of us to be cognizant of that. So if we started at 4 o'clock and then carried on through the dinner hour, do you feel that's okay? Or 5 o'clock, bearing in mind that we might be going to 10 or 11 o'clock at night? So any comments from...
Will there be food?
We can make sure that you get fed, counselors.
Maybe 3 o'clock would be an okay start, because it still gives people to show up after work if it's still going on, right? 3 or 2, I don't know.
Well, but then if we start too early, then no one shows up.
Yeah, exactly.
Work that we're just done before.
Oh, I see. Yeah, sure.
So I was kind of opting that, I know that we start our council meetings at 3, but I was kind of thinking public hearing, if we started at 4, that would work. And then going into the evening and making it work for our community if they want to sign in after work.
That sounds good.
How do you feel about that?
So as a ballpark, participation rate, what do we anticipate?
It's always hard to know, and it depends on which public hearing, right?
Yeah,
so every public hearing is going to be different. So if we start with short-term rentals, we may have a great participation. And then when we go to, let's see, OCP and whatnot, we may not have that participation, and we may marry that with another one at the same time.
So I guess the thing is, if we don't get people consuming the time slot, are we just stuck with dead air for 3 hours? If we've allocated 3 hours and no one's on the line, are we stuck there?
Well, we're gonna start with people in live as well, right? Yeah. So it's not, we're not gonna just go straight to just live streaming. We're gonna have humans in the room and getting to speak through the issues. So that's kind of why I'm saying, if we start at 4, that might be the prudent thing to do. How do you guys feel? Are you comfortable with 4 p.m.?
Well, I'm fine with that. As much time as we need, but I just don't want. I want to make it a productive endeavor and make sure we're not just pulling our thumbs for 3 hours.
Ms. Floyd, you've got your hand up. I
do, Your Worship. We would do the same as we did for the Hay Road public hearing, where we made required people to pre-register. So, Councillor Elliott, we would know who we were going to expect to show up.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. So 4 fine.
Okay, Councillor Palmer.
So just for clarity on the public hearing, so the people will be registered, they'll speak, we'll go through the entire list, and then will it be open to other people that wish to respond?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then just to answer Councillor Elliott's question, that basically we go through the list, people, whoever else after that, go say whatever they need to say. When there's nothing more to be said, then you close the public hearing. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so it'll end as early as, if nobody registers and nobody speaks, it'll end 5 minutes or 15 minutes. And if people want to speak in bringing up new material, it could go on to the next day theoretically, but that's unlikely.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
My question might be, someone registers to talk at 5, and then the next person registers to talk at 7. Are we on the hook for that entire time?
Yeah.
So that's my worry. I say you get the next slot available, that should be your time available. So we're not just wasting 2 hours of dead air time.
Well, what we've seen in the past, especially with these public hearings where people are engaged, is that we have a full slate of people willing to speak, and we kind of know ahead of time. Now, having said that, if we put this out to the public and no one registers to speak prior to 5 p.m., Ms. Floyd, do we still start at 4 with live presentations from our staff and then the community who's in the room, or do we have to alternate? I mean, I guess what are our options? Once we go out and we start advertising, we're bound by the time that we put in that advertisement. We're not going to be able to say, no, nobody's here, so we're just going to waste, we're not going to show up. That's not how it works. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship. And with us being allowed to have 100 residents in the facility, it's probably very unlikely that we would need more than one time slot. The Hay Road one, because we had it during the day and we could only have a maximum of 50, we had the 2 time slots to ensure that people that were working early in the morning or later in the afternoon could come and speak before council.
Okay, so having said that, does someone want to put a motion on the table that we start at 4 p.m. and that we opt for option number 1 for the public hearing? We want to make that motion. Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Any further discussion on that motion?
Just maybe for
Go ahead.
So our objective in this is to hear the community.
Correct.
So we're not defending it, we're not presenting, we're just saying, we're listening.
That is correct. Yeah, we're not there to ask questions or challenge unless we're asking for clarification on what someone is stating. We're not there to debate. We're here to listen. At the end of the public hearing, that's it. We're done. We're not taking any more input. And then we'll either be able to make our resolution at the end or at the next council meeting, we'll make that resolution. Okay? All right, we've set it at 4 p.m. We're going to do the public with live streaming. All those in favor? Online, Councillor Sherlatt, Councillor Palmer in favor. Councillor Palmer's in favor. That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff.
Actually, one question.
Sure.
Is, like, people are still able to submit things
Yes.
to be read at the public hearing, right?
Yes, and they will be able to, we'll advertise in a way that they'll be able to call in if they so desire,
Awesome.
rather than being in person.
Okay.
So they'll have many options of ways of engaging in this public hearing. So our IT staff will determine exactly how that's going to happen, and then we'll set that out in our advertising so people.
Perfect.
All right.
Thanks.
Great. All right, we're going to move on now. So announcements from the mayor. So I have some announcements that I want to make. First of all, Mr. Mattiussi, this is your last formal meeting with us. I want to thank you so very much for what you've done for our community, being present for us and for our staff and for the community as well. We are so grateful to you. Thank you for leading us through to our next CAO. We're so very much appreciative. So thank you. And again, I think other councillors may have a word as well. I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome, Your Worship. It's really a pleasure. I think I'll miss everyone here. You have great staff and great council. So no, it's been a great experience. Got to know Revelstoke, and And I'll be back, but just not as your CEO.
Thank you.
All right. Any comments from councilors online? Seeing none, thank you again on their behalf. I also want to welcome our new operations manager, Mike Manson. Mike, are you with us online? There you are. Mike, I just want to say,
here, yes.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Thank you for taking the job, and I want to say welcome. And Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Yeah, just fumbling with technology here. It's not my familiar back location. Just wanted to also echo my thanks to Mr. Mattiussi. It was a real pleasure having him here. I think he really helped provide a settling for everybody, both council and staff in the community. I did try and encourage him. I think other councilors as well to stay. We would have loved him to have moved to Revelstoke and taken up cross-country skiing and downhill mountain biking, but I guess weren't quite able to persuade him. But thank you very much, Ron.
Thank you, Councillor. I really couldn't do it because you guys are so trim and fit that I'd probably be dead after a week.
And we don't want that. So, well, no, we don't.
Conflict of interest.
I probably have to pay for that. No, not going. Anyway, I want to go back to Mr. Manson. Thank you for being here, for taking the job. I know you've worked for the city before and born and raised here, I believe, and I know the city, and we're really appreciative that you're here, Mike. Thank you for that, and we look forward to working with you and the rest of your team as we move forward. So again, welcome and thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Okay, we're now going to move on to recommendations from Committee of the Whole. It's single-use items regulation bylaw 2263 be brought forward to Council for consideration of second reading. So we're now going to go into number 9A, that bylaw. Is that correct, Ms. Floyd?
You should actually have a resolution to accept the recommendation from Committee of the Whole, and then we can move into 9A afterwards.
All right, great. Someone want to make that recommendation 8A? Someone want to read that for me, and we'll go through the formal. Councilor Brooks-Hill.
That single-use items regulation bylaw number 2263 be brought forward to council for consideration of second reading.
Second for that motion, Councilor Rind. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to 9A, and I'll get someone to put that motion on the table, and then we will discuss. Councilor Brooks-Hill.
The single-use items regulation bylaw number 2263 be read a second time.
Seconder for the motion, Councilor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. And Ms. Floyd, any presentation, anything that you want to say, or we'll just ask you questions?
No presentation, Your Worship. Basically, we are just following up from the Committee of the Whole meeting where we're bringing the bylaw forward for second reading. Our executive assistant, Janet De La Salle, is working with the communications coordinator to push out information through to the community as well as the business community through Stacy at the Chamber of Commerce. And we are attending a webinar by the ministry on October 6th. They're just going to nail down a few details on how to adopt the bylaw, as now it doesn't need to go through for minister approval.
Great, thank you. Councilors, any comments? Councilor Elliott, any desire to speak to this?
No, I think I've said enough over the last couple of years, but I just think it's just weather vane. It's just the world's changing. We need to be conservative. We need to think differently in the way we live. And plastics is just one element that's overabundant in our world. Maybe we can do with a little bit less. This is a move forward.
Great, thank you. Councilors, any other comments? Councillor Brixton?
I'm just curious, because in the bylaw, there's the definitions for checkout bags, plastic bags, drinking straws, plastic utensils. I don't know how to say that word, polystyrene foam service.
Polystyrene.
Polystyrene, there we
There you
go,
go.
that's the right one. But then it only has regulations for the checkout bag, so would we also be banning all the associated other single-use plastics, like the drinking straws, utensils, or?
Yes. That's what you want to weigh in? Yes.
Sure, Your Worship, I can weigh in. So the goal is to ban all of those substances. Part of the reason why we gave it only first reading was to have that discussion with the community prior to giving it second reading. Having said that, if the community weighs in and says that polystyrene or the plastic straws are not something on their radar that they would support, and you guys wouldn't support it, then we could always amend the bylaw.
Okay. So our intention is to ban those. If the community were to come forward and say we don't want those banned in abundance, then we may look at that. For the most part, I think most takeout places now are already altering where you're getting paper straws. And those straws, when you go to most even liquor establishments, they're switching.
Yeah.
And you're either getting a paper straw, you're not getting any straw, that sort of thing. So I think that sort of thing. I think the only thing that we're not going to ban as far as single-use items is garbage bags, right?
No, I think the reality is most businesses are already taking these steps.
Yeah.
So the real, what I was hoping for is more of a media blitz. We are now, this is just part of a media strategy to get the message. We need to do things differently. So that's what I'm trying to pursue, maybe with our communications, whatever we decide to release, the message is let's do things differently.
And I think that's what we're wanting. That's the guidance that our staff are looking for as far as communication out. We're going to do second reading, and our intention with what's in the bylaw is to ban the things that we've listed there and let the community know these are the things that are coming to an end in our community.
If I could also add, don't just end it with release. It just has to be reinforced all the way along.
I think it has to, it's like recycling anything, it has to be continuous.
Yes.
That people know what they can do. It's like now you're recycling at your driveway, what can be recycled, what can't be recycled. It's always continuous. And so I think we're always getting the message out, and people are now asking those questions. What can I recycle? What can't I? And what can I use? And for the most part, I think the community is supportive of this, where they want to get behind not using plastic bags. And anyway.
If I could add one more thing.
You can.
If there's a message on composting that may follow, or steps we're making on that front, that would be a win. If we had some positive message on our waste, that the most greenhouse gas that we produce is probably from our compostable waste, and we need a strategy on that, and we need to put it in place.
Yeah, and we need to find out exactly where we're at with the CSRD and their compostation and how we're going to deal with that. And, in our personal life, we compost everything we can in our backyard compost, which is one of those spinning things.
Yeah, or anything.
So that Yogi doesn't get a chance to eat it. All right, any further comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Online, motion's carried. Thank you unanimously. Appreciate that. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 9B, Development Service Zoning Bylaw Update Bylaw. So, Ms. Wade, you have Mr. Simon and Mr. Brooks here. So let me put this, get this motion on the table, and then we can ask some questions, or you can do a presentation. So item number 1, someone want to make this, put this on the table for me, please? Councilor Brooks Hill.
That zoning bylaw number 2299 be read a first and second time.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Elliott. Discussion on the motion now, Ms. Wade, Mr. Simon, I'll let you take over from here and then we'll go forward.
Thank you, Your Worship. We just have a quick presentation. And Mr. Simon is going to do the driving. Mr. Brooks is joining us as our consultant, and the three of us will be participating in this presentation and available for questions and answers. So,
sorry if I could just ask the corporate officer for host capabilities to put the presentation up here. Thank you very much.
can everyone see it now?
We can, yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, moving forward, we're going to start with just a quick overview. We will have the recommendation that is before you. You've read item number 1. So staff is recommending for first and second reading and setting of a public hearing for bylaw number 2299. So just to give you a little bit of background, we had met on September 16th for the Committee of the Whole. We had a very good working session and robust, lots of questions. So we felt that was a very worthwhile exercise, and we got lots of information that we summarized and shared back with council. We, from that, had a couple of tweaks that we made with the zoning bylaw amendments to deal with agriculture as a home occupation and adding some links. And we've also, after the meeting, received a question about the minimum side yard setbacks and how that impacts the accessory dwelling units, about 1.5 versus 1.2. So we'll go through that and explain that to council. And the other thing that I wanted to note is that in your report, we have the chronology of all the engagement we've had with council committees, the community, Talk Revelstoke is all outlined in your report. So I won't go through that in detail because we've gone through that at the last meeting and meetings before that. And I want to note that this has been, you know, well over a year of consultation in the making to bring this forward for council for first and second reading. On that note, I wanted to turn this over to Mr. Brooks. And Mr. Brooks is going to walk through the question we had in regards to the setbacks for dwelling units. And I'll let Mr. Brooks take it on from here.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Wade. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Excellent. It's nice to see Mayor and Council again. Thank you again for having me today. One of the questions we received in response to our presentation to the Committee of a Whole was specifically in regards to what is commonly called fire separation, under the building code is known as limiting distance. And it was in regards to our proposal that for accessory dwelling units, there is a 1.5 meter side yard setback associated with those accessory dwelling units. The conversation really stems from the fact that if you reduce that 1.5 meter side yard setback, it actually impacts the limiting distance between any structure that gets constructed on an adjacent lot. So by reducing the 1.5 to 1.2, what it will do is have impacts on the adjacent lot, requiring additional or increased construction standards on any building, whether it's an accessory dwelling or a shed, constructed within the 10 feet of the sidewall of that particular lot. So as you can see here from an example, if you were to reduce to 1.2 to actually meet the limiting distance requirements under the under the building bylaw or building code, sorry, you'd have to be 1.8 meters away, which would actually impact the adjacent parcel. This isn't fundamentally an issue if the city itself doesn't have issues with increased construction costs, because that's what will be the result of reducing that limiting distance. But our recommendation was to keep it at 1.5 and allow, if people wished to have a reduced setback, that they could address it through variance, because then the property owners adjacent that could be impacted could actually have a say in the impacts on their properties. Next slide. In addition, at the Committee of the Whole, we went through numerous housekeeping amendments. The fundamental purpose of the housekeeping amendments really is to focus on ease of interpretation for both the public, development community, and staff. These really focused on, as we've noted, removing the outdated references, ensuring consistency through the bylaw with regards to how terminology is used, definitions, where we've added additional graphics, regulations that are currently distributed throughout the bylaws, consolidating them into one location again, just for ease of use of the bylaw. A couple additional things that we have done is italicized all words in the bylaw that are defined, so people know that they're defined and actually can look those definitions up quickly. Next slide, please.
Councillor Palmer, you have a question.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Just a question regarding the side yard setbacks, and I see that, well, there was an email that I received this afternoon. I haven't had an opportunity to look at it, but the one question I have is, and I think it's probably more to city staff, is on the side yard setbacks, if that's the requirement for building, it seems to me that we've done a number of variances on side yard setbacks that's reduced that. So there just seems to me maybe a bit of an inconsistency on what we're saying in one place and then in another. I don't think it's a major thing, but it's just I'm now reflecting back on some of those side yard setback variants that we've had in the past. So maybe it's more just a comment at this point.
Ms. Wade?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps if I could respond to Councillor Palmer. Yes, we have done variances and each one is unique. And in those cases, fire separation would be addressed. And in some cases, there would be requirements for additional fire construction. And in some cases, there might have been more, the separation of 3.0 meters, and there wasn't a requirement for increased cost. So each one was always very independent and unique. And we did address that as we went through it. What we're proposing is trying to be consistent in our application moving forward. And if somebody chooses to reduce the siting of their accessory dwelling unit, then they can consider the additional cost that it may incur.
Any follow-up, Mr. Palmer?
No, that's sufficient for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Birch. You may carry on.
Certainly. We've also covered numerous bylaw content changes throughout the bylaw. One of the main ones really was the accessory dwelling unit, looking at accessory dwelling units, both garden suites and carriage suites. We touched a little bit on that with regards to the setback conversation we just had. Also with secondary suites and how secondary suites are currently permitted in the BC Building Code and to bylaw, and bringing the actual zoning bylaw into consistency with BC Building Code for allowing secondary suites in two-family dwellings and row housing. We also reviewed parking in general, and also addressed a reduction of parking requirements for multi-family and multi-use developments that are within close proximity to amenities, again, to allow for flexibility. We've addressed some food security measures specifically with regards to minor agriculture and greenhouses in front yards and setbacks and provisions in regards to the greenhouses themselves. Next slide, please. Another comment we actually addressed, and this was on the previous slide actually, is storage on residential properties in regards to recreational vehicles. Those toys that we all own, how we should store those on residential properties, and fundamentally in regards to how that could potentially impact neighborhood character. Another issue that we have touched base on is density bonusing. This is to provide, again, greater flexibility of that density bonusing, centralizing the density bonusing provisions in the supplementary regulations so they're easier to administer and find for people that are utilizing them, and fundamentally having these in place so it reduces the reliance on comprehensive development zones within the community. We also addressed temporary buildings and structures. Again, this was really to align it with the new building bylaw, but also with the BC Building Code fundamentally. And certainly one of the last items that we addressed, but certainly not least, is really dealing with minimum lot sizes, specifically removing different minimum lot sizes within zones for serviced and non-serviced parcels to provide one standard of a minimum lot size for the property to promote infill opportunities and flexibility when dealing with this, and allowing for those properties that are unserviced to find the most appropriate technology to allow that parcel to develop, but not hindering potential new technologies to allow for smaller lots than was previously or currently provided in the zoning. I'll hand it back over to Ms. Wade to go over next steps.
Great. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brooks. And where we're at now is that staff is recommending the first and second readings of the bylaw number 2299, and that based on the direction from council on this consideration, that staff would be prepare the bylaw for public hearing on November 23rd. I pass this back to you, Your Worship.
Great, thank you, Ms. Wade. Any comments or questions from councillors regarding the zoning bylaw 2299 and reading first and second time? Councillor Elliott?
I think it's great that we're getting the zoning bylaws updated and brought up to clean up a mess that's been lingering for a long, long time. I still have a couple of questions. One in particular, the line between temporary building and a temporary use permit. Sometimes about a temporary use permit, we allow non-permanent structures to go on there and be sitted. But if the temporary building can only be on place for a year, and our temporary use permit is allowed to go for 3 years plus another extension period, it seems a bit odd. There might be some, I agree that the bylaw needs to be updated, but I just, it's a confusing spot for me.
Okay. So, Ms. Wade, Mr. Simon, do you want to weigh in difference between temporary use and temporary building?
No, I understand the difference,
Okay.
but I just think that there's a problem in that a temporary building is only allowed for 1 year, and a temporary use is allowed for 3 or more.
Okay. Comments on length of time for temporary building and temporary use permit?
Would you like me to tackle that, Ms. Wade?
Sure, Mr. Brooks.
The temporary use permit is a fundamental different tool that allows council to test out uses in a particular area of town that may not permit that use. So you use that tool in a situation where you may, for example, and this is just a rough example, maybe there's a light industrial use that someone wants in a residential zone. The temporary use permits allows you to put conditions on that use. Part of the proposal may be a temporary building, but you're able to utilize a temporary use permit to put conditions around that to ensure that it reduces impact on an area. So it's about use and allowing a use in an area that you typically would not have that use. But the temporary building itself, temporary buildings are allowed all over the place. It has nothing to fundamentally do with the zone or the use, but the way that they deal with, the reason there's a time difference on those things is that the temporary use permit is legislated at the provincial level. Council only wants 1 year in a temporary use permit, you can do that. You have the authority as council to do that. What we're recommending, due to the challenging nature of bylaw enforcement with those temporary structures, is 1 year because of the nature of the structures and the issues with bylaw enforcement over time. In a temporary use permit, because you have the power of conditions of temporary use permit, you can deal with conditions on a case-by-case basis. The zoning bylaw doesn't allow case-by-case decisions. You don't have discretionary power, so you have to have a standard integrated into your bylaw to allow you to address those issues.
So in the case, Johnson Heights in particular, we allow temporary buildings to be placed on a chunk of land that we granted a temporary use permit for. So effectively, the buildings were going to be utilized for 2 or 3 years while they was a work camp, right? So they were only eligible to put in place for a year under this setup, but they intended to use it as a and ask for a temporary use permit to allow it to go for 3 years. So there's a bit of an oddity in that discussion.
Okay, Ms. Wade, you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Worship, to Councillor Elliott. Just a point of clarification. Because it was a temporary use permit, we outlined the conditions that they had to meet, and that was the modular workforce housing, so they could do that for up to 3 years. That's very different than a temporary structure, as Mr. Brooks has referred to, that we're outlining in the zoning bylaw. We're being very clear about what a temporary building is versus what is built into a temporary use permit. They're two very different things.
I understand the different regulations, but you're not seeing the point, I guess, is that it's a temporary building. All guidelines, it's a temporary building. The maximum time, it's a year. We granted them a temporary work permit housing complex for 3 years and an option to renew. And I say there is some grayness in that, and that's all I'm getting to.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any further comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed?
Sorry, Your Worship, I was putting my hand up. I had more questions.
Okay, go ahead and ask the question, Councillor Palmer.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Sulz. I think, I'm not sure, the questions I have are to my colleagues at the council table. And I had sent an email yesterday, so I'm not sure who had an opportunity to look at that email. I'll just bring it up now. And I guess, first of all, if there's anybody that had any of my council members had any questions regarding those 4 or so concerns that I had on this bylaw. Okay, so I do have concerns, and I expressed them a little bit at the committee of the whole. And I just want to make sure that that we're having an appropriate dialogue at the council table as to the merits of this. And my first concern is that with this new bylaw, along with the short-term rentals, that we'll end up having 5 forms of alternate dwelling units permitted in R1 zones, all R1 zones, including secondary suites, which are currently permitted, short-term rentals, carriage homes, garden suites, and bed and breakfast, which are currently permitted. Each one of these has different requirements. So if you have a secondary suite, if I understand correctly, under the current bylaw, is that you can't have a bed and breakfast. With the short-term rentals that's proposed and still is before us, that will have to be a secondary suite in that situation. And we're putting a further limitation outside of the bylaw of a limit on the number of units that are permitted at 300. The carriage homes in this are, you cannot have a secondary suite, and thus you can't have a short-term rental in the carriage in this carriage homes. Garden suites are similar to the carriage homes, and they prohibit having secondary suites. Bed and breakfast also prohibit having secondary suites. However, with a bed and breakfast, you can have a vacation rental. Now, some people, there might be a confusion on whether that's a short-term rental or not, but I think intuitively the bed and breakfast are something, if you have that entitlement, then you can have vacation rentals. Whether that's included in the number, that's another question. So that my concern is, I don't think that we've had sufficient dialogue on the implications of the variety and potential unintended consequences of this complexity. So I want to make it very clear that I'm in favor conceptually of all the proposed changes to the bylaw. There's some things that I think need to be tweaked, but I'm in favor of them, including the carriage homes and the garden suites. However, I'm not sure that we've had sufficient dialogue with the community. The second, so I guess my question to my colleagues is do you see otherwise? Do you think there's no problem with this, that we should just race ahead with the repeal and replace to the zoning bylaw based on the complexity, the matrix the 5 different types of accommodation.
Any comments from councilors? Councilor Charlotte, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, Councillor Palmer, for bringing this forward. I know the number of bylaws and changes that we've been working on over our term has been a lot. When we first got elected, we talked about how much work needed to be done. And looking at housing every which way that we can was a big part of that. And I think that while this bylaw does bring in some new definitions, these are definitions we've been looking for. And I think that having that clarity can help us start to have that conversation as a community. From what I understood, this is bringing in the definitions of those alternate dwelling units, allowing them in certain situations, like in the R1 zones, but that we will still be going through each zone in the comprehensive zoning bylaw review in the next step, that we'll be doing more comprehensive reviews and getting more into the details. But this stage, this phase 1, is really just helping us have a clear conversation, which I think is, personally, I find very important to get done during our term, so that the next council can start with a fresh conversation that is clearly defined. So I am comfortable with this going forward. I wouldn't suggest that we are racing it forward. Nothing about this process has felt super fast to me, but I can also understand that there's a lot coming together at the same time. So hopefully by going methodically and having these thorough discussions as council, and that if we as council can be clear in our communications with the community as well, using Talk Revelstoke to make sure that that information is available in all avenues in any way that a resident would like to engage with them. I'm looking forward to the public hearings to hear some of those concerns. And if there are some details that we need to tweak, then we can do that. But I have a feeling that a lot of the major concerns will be part of that more comprehensive review that is coming in further phases after we get through the OCP and after we get a few other pieces in place.
Councillor Brooks.
To Councillor Palmer, I can appreciate that it might seem that we're going forwards quite quickly. However, you're new to council, and the council has talked about these concepts of the garden suite and the carriage home for quite some time. And there's been a number of instances where, Revelstoke community or whatever, people have been, saying, why hasn't this happened? I feel that there is a lot of support in the community, and the fact that there hasn't been a lot of engagement on Talk Revelstoke, to me, to some degree, it just shows that people want it to happen. When people are against something, that's when you get a lot of engagement. When people are for something, there's a lot more silence, generally speaking. And, maybe you're right. Maybe there are people who are against this, but there's still the public hearing, so there's still that opportunity for it to be heard. And I really think that moving these things forward is really in the best interest of the community. I think that there's a real need for carriage homes and garden suites to be built in town to address the housing needs, and I don't think delaying it is going to help people. I think that I don't see a good reason to delay this, basically.
Okay. Councillor Ron.
Yeah, Councillor Palmer, is your concern the number of total uses allowed in the residential zone, or is it the conflict or sort of relationship with vacation rentals that you're not sure about? Because my understanding is that these are just the definitions and that those rules would come after. Is that correct?
So yeah, one of my, I guess the next on my list was on the implications of the short-term rentals. With this repeal and replace zoning bylaw, I just make sure that I have this correct, and this be a question through the mayor to staff, that if this passes as it is right now, all R1 zones will be entitled to secondary suites or I'll leave the short-term rentals out for a moment, secondary suites, carriage homes, garden suites, and bed and breakfasts. There be an or in it, for the most part in all of that. Is that correct?
Ms. Wade, Mr. Simon, or Mr. Brooks?
Your worship, the idea is that those uses would be allowed in that zone so that people have choices that they can make as to how they want to move forward with housing. And the idea is, I just wanted to clarify that a bed and breakfast cannot have a vacation rental in it. So I just want to clarify that. A bed and breakfast is a bed and breakfast, or you will have a vacation rental, which is the terminology that exists so far in our zoning bylaw that we're replacing with short-term rental. And that if you are going to do short-term rental in a residential zone, what the short-term rental says is you must have another unit. So if you don't have another unit, you can either apply to build another unit, or you can choose another option, be it a carriage house or a garden suite. Or you can operate your house as a bed and breakfast and meet the requirements. So it's all about choice and flexibility to suit our community needs.
So Mayor Sulz, I think that was a yes. So just for clarity, so long as those people that are in an R1 zone, so long as they can meet the requirements, they can have a secondary suite or a carriage home or a garden suite or operate their home as a bed and breakfast. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go on to the second point that Councillor Ryan was asking about the short-term rentals, and I guess that's this would be a question to staff. So I need to understand with the proposed short-term rentals. So that is already, we're going to a public hearing on that, if I recall correctly. How does the timing work with this repeal and replace and the enabling of the short-term rentals as is proposed right now?
Ms. Wade?
Yes, so we have sequenced these public hearings and these readings so that we can appropriately amend the zoning bylaw with the short-term rentals. And we've had to do that because there has been a considerable delay in the short-term rentals.
So Mayor Sulz, through to the director, so we're amending the current zoning bylaw if everything goes according to plan. We're amending the current zoning bylaw to allow short-term rentals, and then after that we're doing the repeal and replace of the zoning bylaw that will include the short-term rentals. Is that correct, or do I not have that sequencing clear?
The idea is that we go forward with the repeal and replace of the zoning bylaw and go forward with public hearing and have third reading. And at third reading, should the short-term rental move forward, we would do third reading as amended to include the short-term rental amendments into it. So it'd be all done at the same time.
Does that sequence make sense to you, Councilor Palmer? So repeal and replace of the zoning bylaw, then we go to the public hearing and then the third reading, and then in the meantime we'll be doing the public hearing for the short-term rental, and then if that's approved, then this the zoning bylaw will be there'll be a change at the third reading to allow short-term rentals.
So then just so it's clear in my mind, then we are planning on doing first and second reading on the repeal and replace, and with the intention of changing that after second reading to include short-term rentals. Just for clarification, I need to understand this.
Is it after second reading or after third reading, Ms. Wade?
It'd be a third reading as amended.
After third reading will be the short-term rentals will be included in this.
So the public hearing for this bylaw updates November 23rd. The public hearing for the short-term rentals is October 27th. So hopefully we'll have some resolutions by October 28th, 29th to move forward on the short-term rentals, and then we incorporating those recommendations into the bylaw.
Yes.
Does that make sense, Tim?
Does that make sense, Councilor Palmer?
So Mayor Sulz, I guess I am a little bit confused, and that's why I was raising the concern, and maybe it's a question for the corporate officer on the timing, because it seems like we're having two processes and trying to make them mesh. I guess intuitively, it makes more sense to me to finish one or the other, and then have the complete bylaw, but to do it with the intention of changing it seems to me might be bypassing a public process. But maybe I'm just wondering about that, and I think that'd be a question for the corporate officer if I'm missing something.
Sure. Ms. Floyd, do you want to weigh in? You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, Your Worship. So the plan that we discussed the other day with Development Services and Corporate was that we would bring the zoning bylaw for first and second. The short-term rental bylaw would have its public hearing, be read a third time. Once it's adopted, we would have the public hearing for the zoning bylaw as amended at third reading. Marianne, is that correct?
So my understanding is that we're doing the repeal and replace, first and second reading, public hearing for the zoning bylaw. We're doing first and second reading for the short-term rental and the public hearing. And then we're adopting it at third reading. And then the zoning bylaw will be as amended for the short-term rental, is my understanding.
Okay.
And that gives Mr. Mattiussi is going to weigh in?
Yes, please.
Why not? Councillor, I heard two different things, and corporate officer, I believe the step was the repeal and replace of the zoning bylaw to take it first and second reading and hold.
Right.
Then begin the process for the short-term rentals, take that to public hearing, get input on that specific thing, and then approve it, and then take that and amend the zoning bylaw with what you now have. And I believe, and I could be wrong, but so Ms. Floyd correct me, I think the concern is, and maybe the concern of Councillor Palmer, is that if it receives third reading, the zoning bylaw receives third reading, if you amend it, it may have to go back for a public hearing. And correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor, is that your concern?
Yes, that kind of epitomizes what I've heard right now, that would be my concern. The concern that I had coming into the conversation was my confusion on the procedural stuff going ahead. It seems to me that that we would be better to do one or the other. I think the zoning bylaw first, get that done, and then have the full robust repeal and replace that already has for the short-term rentals, to get the short-term rentals complete first, and then have that zoning bylaw is amended with the short-term rentals, and then do the process of first and second reading where that's already included, rather than kind of bringing it in at that third reading, which it seems to me that from the conversation here may trigger an additional public hearing anyway. So we aren't saving anything and possibly just triggering more confusion. My preference would be to have a clear timeline before we proceed with this. I couldn't, and let me preface before I say this, I am in favor of most of the stuff that's changes that are proposed there. I'm comfortable in general. I think we need to hear back from the community, just like the rest of council. However, I'm in favor of the densification, the carriage homes, the garden suites, getting this stuff sorted out. I'm very strongly in favor and applaud the work that the planning staff have done to clean up the zoning bylaw. However, I am concerned about the confusion along with the short-term rentals. Mayor Sulz, unless there's some more comment on that, I'll capture my last two, and I may have possibly a motion on here, depending where it goes, an amending motion maybe.
Okay, so Councillor Ron, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Palmer just in terms of the confusion on the timeline there, because what I hadn't appreciated until this conversation is what the implications would be based on that timing, and now I'm very unsure about if those auxiliary or whatever those are called, like carriage homes and garden suites and all those things, were to be defined in the zoning bylaw, then would they be considered, like, would your home then be considered a secondary suite, and then what would the implications be for short-term rental and who is and who isn't allowed? And if I'm confused, I feel like there's probably other community members there, so that should be very clear which is coming first and then what that means.
So it was very clear to me as we came into this is that there was a strategy that was laid out, and that the uses were typical of most communities, and I'll go to you, Mr. Brooks, typical of most communities with R1 in the things that we've got stated here. Now, the only concern that I have is the procedure. If we do everything as we had planned, where we do first and second reading and hold, we go through we go through short-term rentals, do the public hearing, do the third reading, and then we go back to this. I want to make sure that we're not doing another public hearing for zoning in addition to this one and the one that we are planning for the short-term rentals. So can you weigh in on that, or do you have a comment?
Through your worship. I think procedurally, I think Mr. Mattiussi and Ms. Wade and Ms. Floyd all comment on procedures that would be more than valid. I don't myself would have a concern with the initial proposal of running two separate public hearings. The intent of a public hearing is to ensure that the public has a comment in regards to proposed bylaws being brought forward. By doing separate public hearings, what you're doing is actually providing additional opportunity for comment on a particular bylaw that's going to be integrated into another bylaw that you're having public hearing on, which fundamentally, from my experience, actually provides more than adequate public consultation and wouldn't trigger a second public consultation by bringing forward a bylaw at third amended because of the nature of the public hearing process. What you're doing is you're doing more than required public hearing, because you could easily take that the vacation rental or short-term rental and integrate it into the existing zoning bylaw now if you really wanted to, and run it under one public hearing. By doing the two public hearings, you're actually providing for greater public comment on a bylaw that's going to end up being a single bylaw in the future.
Great, thank you for your input, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Palmer, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just for clarity, I certainly wasn't suggesting just having one public hearing here. It's just the confusion on the timing of them. So I think the zoning bylaw, that path that we've been on for a while now, to have a public hearing on the short-term rentals is appropriate. And it's just the confusion on the timing. And then I do have another comment. I'm not sure if anybody else is up to speak there.
Oh, go ahead.
So I'm confused still a little bit, though there's some clarity, but I guess there's enough dialogue that question that is still standing there. Again, I'm conceptually in favor of everything that's happening here. It's just on that procedural stuff. The second thing that I'm concerned about is the public engagement. We're calling it a robust community consultation, and my colleagues have said, okay, well, this has been on the books for some time, and it has. The dialogue's certainly been in the community for years, and I agree that there's that people want these other forms of accommodation. However, to say when we do a survey that was in June, July, going into the summer, I'm not sure exactly how long that was, with 11 responses, then I've had enough dialogue with individuals that say no, they didn't really feel that they had that opportunity. And I'm concerned that this might blow up. Much like Grizzly Plaza, that there hasn't been adequate information going out. Again, I understand that there's, it was pushed out on Facebook and pushed out, in other forms. However, it didn't encourage engagement. And so I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm also concerned about that this started out, at least in March, was a housekeeping thing. And now we're looking at very substantive changes. There was the first committee of the whole, I think it was, that I was in March, when it was brought forward to council. The term housekeeping was brought at that time. And so now we're talking very major changes that include these alternate forms. We're talking about greenhouses. There was dialogue about greenhouses in the front yards and whether we're going to have a whole bunch of broken glass shacks throughout the city. That I think Councillor Elliott brought that concern. I don't think we've had enough dialogue whether that's appropriate. So that's, as it stands right now, I couldn't support first and second reading. However, I would, I would like to, table the motion subject to better clarity on the timing and the process for staff to take a look at that and say, maybe we better be doing the short-term rentals and then this zoning repeal and replace in sequence rather than doing them sort of partially overlapping. I could certainly make that tabling motion, but I'd listen to my colleagues at the council table first if there's some other ideas.
Any comments, Councillor Bergstrom?
Well, I'm happy to read this for a first and second time. The second, we put that motion on the table, right?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So in terms of the public hearing, if this passes, I'd be happy to change that motion to say a public hearing be scheduled once the vacation rental bylaw is adopted. So then, once it's done, so that then there's a very clear timeline. We're not ending up scheduling this public hearing and then the vacation rental needs to be amended and needs a second public hearing and suddenly things are getting out of joint. Perhaps that would...
Okay. Are you done? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
But, to me, we're not there yet. We're just talking about reading this the first and second time right now.
Okay. Any other comments from other councillors? Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm just very confused, but are there implications in the zoning bylaw changes that would impact how short-term rentals get applied? Because if there are, it does seem like the public wouldn't have enough information at that first public hearing if they don't know what the new bylaw changes and definitions are going to be.
So Ms. Wade, if I'm understanding the zoning bylaw, what we're doing first and second reading is not going to have an implication on the short-term rentals in the public hearing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's not as if short-term rental public hearing happens and just as an example, a carriage suite isn't defined yet, so people don't know that might be an option for them, but then later that does become an option?
Well, it's a little confusing now the way you're asking the question. So I'll get this way to weigh in. I know you've got your hand up, Councillor Palmer, and I'll come back to you in a minute.
Yep. So specifically, the way we've designed this is to not permit secondary short-term rentals in the carriage houses and the garden suites. If we want to revisit that at a later date, that's a later discussion. We're being very clear on that. And I just want to highlight that the reason we're in this sequencing and it's confusing, which I'm happy to come back and lay out, is because we've had such a delay in the short-term rentals. We were intending to have the short-term rentals public hearing before this and to get this forward, and then it would come into the zoning bylaw. But because of the delay in the short-term rentals, staff is doing their very best to sequence this and to give even more, as Mr. Brooks says, opportunity for the public hearing. We've worked through this so that we can continue moving forward with what we've heard from the community. We have spent a lot of time with the community in the last 2 years that are really looking forward to having these zoning bylaw amendments and the short-term rental so that we can move forward with enforcement of short-term rentals and what people are looking for flexibility and housing.
Yeah, just a comment. I think I had somehow got confused by that, but that was my original understanding. So thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. To Councillor Brooks Hill, were you proposing an amendment to your? Because if you are, then probably should proceed with that amendment if that's what you're doing. If not, I would be putting a motion on the table to table this until we had clarity or something. But if you have something in mind already, because the concern that I have is I don't have enough confidence in the clarity to vote in favor of first and second reading. But if we kill it first and second reading, if we vote it, if 3 of us vote against it, then that's a potential disaster, I think, because there's so much good stuff. So I think that's a potential risk depending on how my colleagues are going to vote. But I can't support it as it is right now. But I understood that Councillor Brooks Hill may have wanting to be putting an amendment on the table.
No.
Okay, good. All right. So, Mr. Brooks, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. This is just a suggestion. In many other jurisdictions that I do work in situations like this, what you'll often see is them running a joint public hearing. And that may be a solution in this situation where basically you have 2 fundamental zoning bylaw provisions that are going to be joined if they're both consistent. So you could run a joint public hearing where you treat them as separate public hearings, but address the same issues on the same night under basically one session. And that'd be a recommendation that may help to alleviate some of the challenges with scheduling, and that may help help the team address the issues.
That's good.
No, personally, I think that the 2, while they are somewhat linked, I think they're quite distinct. The vacation rentals is one aspect of this zoning bylaw repeal and replace. The only component that relates to the vacation rentals is the provision that the garden suite and carriage homes not be used for vacation rentals. So that's a very minor component in the grand scheme of it. I see them as being quite distinct.
Okay, so when I'm looking at this, we're motion on the table to do first and second reading, and then that first and second reading just puts us in hold pattern. And then we go through the public hearing process for the short-term rentals. And then once that's complete, then we're going to do the public hearing for this. And then we will do third reading, and if we need to do any amendments because of short-term rentals. So I don't think what we're doing here is going to confuse the community or hold things up in any way or push things through in any way that's not consistent with what the community would want. So I am supportive of this sort of thing, but I just want to bring that up. So Ms. Floyd, you have your hand up, and then I'll go back to Councilor.
I do. Thank you, Your Worship. So for clarity, our proposal would be to give first and second readings of the zoning bylaw repeal and replace today. October 27th, have a public hearing for short-term rentals. November 23rd, have the zoning bylaw repeal and replace public hearing. And then we would reread third reading of the short-term rentals to put it into the repeal and replace bylaw as opposed to the 1264 that we're proposing now. And then the short-term rental bylaw would be on hold until the zoning bylaw was adopted. And then we would reread third reading and adopt the short-term rental afterwards in the new repeal and replace bylaw. Does that make sense?
Councilor Brooks-Hill, you have your hand up. And then I need to go back to Councilor Palmer, but Councilor Brooks-Hill, because he's wanting some clarification on what you just said.
No, I understand finally, but what's going on. I do think that there's a potential problem with the short-term rental with that long a gap. It's pretty hard, I think, for council to not talk about short-term rentals for a month.
Right.
After a public hearing, I think that long a gap leaves council open to people feeling that councilors are getting new information from people yelling at them in the street or something.
Well, so we will have the option after that public hearing to make a motion if that's council desire at the time, or I'm quite prepared to call a special meeting to deal with that short time after. Is that something that you'd be more comfortable with?
Well, because it seems that staff wants, so maybe we could get Cindy to say it again, but to wait for the adoption of the short-term rental bylaw until after the public hearing for the repeal and replace bylaw.
That's correct.
And so maybe we do need to put them closer together because I do have concerns about that long period.
Sure. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to Councilor Palmer. Yes, his hand up. He's been patient.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I believe my preference right now is that we would complete the zoning or sort of the short-term rental amendment, have it adopted, and then go straight into the first and second reading. I think it's much cleaner and it's less risky from a legal procedural confusion thing. This because especially the repeal and replace is a really major change, and we don't want to be coming and readdressing this later on because some procedural hiccup. I would like to put a motion on the table, and if it doesn't get seconded, it's whatever. But I think the motion that I would put on is that this motion, the first and second reading, be tabled until the adoption of the short-term rental amendments.
Okay. So is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it so we can discuss the question.
Okay. So there's a seconder, so you want to discuss it?
Yeah, so what are the implications, like if Director Wade could sort of touch on what that would delay?
Ms. Wade?
That would be a delay. You're quite correct, Councillor Ryan. And what we have, in order to address the time lag that we've experienced, we being corporate and planning, have worked out a sequencing to do this in the legislatively proper process so that we can keep the short-term rental moving and the zoning bylaw updates in a timely manner. Otherwise, we're going to have this drag into 2022.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments, Councillor Elliott?
So if the timeline stays in place, the bylaws are adopted November 23rd or presented to the public on 23rd, and we get a decision on the next council meeting. What difference is there in time? First of all, the bylaw on the short-term rentals is approved once we had the public hearing on the next council meeting. We go to first and second reading on the bylaws, public consultation on the 23rd. What's the difference in the time?
Comments? Ms. Wood?
I'm trying to follow the ball now, sorry. So if you table,
Mr. Mattiussi's going to weigh in, or do you want to go first?
Well, if she's untangled, then I'll let her.
Okay, if you've untangled, let's carry on.
Okay, I'll work together with you, Mr. Mattiussi here. So if we table it and we don't have a public hearing, so you're tabling your readings. So we have to bring the tabling back, then we have to set a public hearing, and we have to, do what we have to do for COVID. So I see that will stretch us out into 2022 by a logistics point of view. And Ms. Floyd can weigh in on the logistics of that as well. What we were trying to do is sequence things, so knowing what we had to do in a sequential manner so we could get the 3 items, OCP, short-term rental, zoning bylaw, through to the end of the year, since this has been on our work plan for 2 years. So we have sequentially managed the delays we've experienced in order to manage this to meet council priorities. And
Ms. Floyd, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Mattiussi.
Yes, Ms. Wade is totally correct that this will push us where we could potentially be having a rather large public hearing during the Christmas holiday season or the end of the year. And again, we might receive some feedback from the community that the timing is not good. So we'd have to push it to 2022.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mattiussi.
Your worship, hardly the wisdom of Solomon, but trying to listen to the concerns of Councillor Palmer and trying to deal with the timing. One of the things that Councillor Brooks Hill did mention was uncoupling the first and second reading from the date of the public hearing. And even council had some time now to do that. At the very least, that you get your first and second, which I don't believe materially changed anything. I think the real issue for everyone is the timing of the public hearing, not the fact that this item is getting put on the table and now becomes part of a process. So a third alternative, could be to go back to that motion and just say, give it first and second reading. It's now part of the public record, and now staff can take some time to determine when that public hearing can actually fit in. It may push it out, but of course the short-term rental may push it out anyway. You really don't know what that's going to do to the process. And then you still have the flexibility of setting the public hearing in relation to the short-term rental. I know it screws up staff's plan, but if council has concerns about that timing, but by giving it first and second reading, at least that's done. And now the second part of the motion is the date of the public hearing. And you may determine, very quickly when that could be, because I think you do have a lot of things in the air. Christmas is coming. And the last thing you want is a massive public hearing where the public has to sort out short-term rentals and how short-term rentals are done in the zoning bylaw. I mean, it's confusing. But what I don't want to see thrown out is the 98% of the other work that has been done on the zoning bylaw that staff, also needs. So I'm just trying to buy some flexibility for council.
All right.
I'm just curious why we couldn't approve the vacation rentals, give it third reading early November and decide on a public hearing on the 23rd. Is there a required timeline between we giving first and second read? Because my problem is, or Councilor Palmer's problem is the sequencing of the issue. We're approving a bylaw which we're waiting for the vacation rental to be decided upon. Why don't we just decide on the vacation rental and then go to the public hearing on the zone? And keep the same dates we've already established, the 27th and the 23rd.
Any comments, Ms. Floyd?
Maybe there's a time that has to be extended between.
I still, there we go. Sorry, Your Worship. It's keeping the same dates. So you're proposing we don't change anything, Councillor Elliott?
It's just, once we have the information or the decision made on vacation rentals, then we make a decision to go to bylaw reading. Why do we need to change the public hearing dates? Oh, I guess we can't decide on a public hearing date for November 23rd before we put that on the table that we're voting on. Maybe that's what I'm missing.
So, Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up, and then Councillor Brooks Hill. So, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I tend to agree. I don't know precisely, but with Councillor Elliott, that I think it can be done. So if we were going to October 27th for the short-term rentals public hearing, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
So call a special meeting on the 28th, assuming everybody's happy, we adopt that. I'm not sure if we have to have give third reading. We can do a third reading, I think, right after the public hearing, I believe.
Yes.
And then have a special meeting the next day to adopt. And then at that special meeting, give first and second reading to the repeal and replace bylaw, and set the November 23rd public hearing. And then it's clear there. Then there's not this confusion with. Maybe I'm the only person on the planet that's confused with this, but then it's clear. Vacation rentals, we get that out of the way. It's a big enough issue for our community. We get that done, and possibly need to adjust it depending what the public says. And then we go on to the 23rd. We have a little bit more opportunity to be hearing and vetting through these proposed changes of the zoning bylaw. I think it's a better way, and I think we can keep pretty much to the same timelines. That's my comment, and that's the purpose behind the tabling motion. Just we can still schedule all that stuff out.
This way.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I'm hearing is the suggestion about going for a public hearing, and if council is comfortable, they can do the third reading night, and then they can do a special meeting and do the adoption. Today, what was before you is the first and second reading, and to count Mr. Mattiussi's point, if the first and second readings are done and no public hearing set, we can bring the public hearing date back when council is considering adoption of the short-term rental bylaw, and have a resolution for council to set the public hearing date then.
Okay, thank you for that. That makes sense to everybody?
I'm lost again, sorry.
So basically, what I'm saying, Ms. Wade is saying, so Ms. Floyd, do you want to weigh in before I try to explain, or do you want to explain?
I don't want to explain. I do want to mention, though, that along with the short-term rental bylaw, we need to bring 3 other bylaws that will be affected: the fees and charges, business licensing, and the MTI bylaw, so that we can actually enforce. So those all need to go hand in hand with the short-term rental so that they're adopted at the same time.
Great. All right, so if we go and do first and second reading today on this, we park it, then we go through the short-term rentals, and then we can call a meeting if we do third reading that night. Do I have to wait 24 hours before calling a new meeting, Ms. Floyd?
She's saying yes.
Yes, okay, so I need to wait 24 hours before calling another meeting, and then we can adopt, and then we can go forward from there, correct? Gives us some flexibility with that. All I'm doing is confusing everybody.
Yeah.
So, that's what it is. That's exactly. So at this point in time, we have basically a motion on the table to table this. Let me call the vote on that, and then
Table it or to pass it as proposed?
It's to table it. So if you vote,
that's
if you
right.
second that, so if you vote in favor of it, it's tabled.
Yeah.
If you vote that down, then we can go back to the first motion that's on the table. So,
It's not what you suggested.
Council Palmer, you have your hand up.
No, it's Tim.
Thank you, Mayor. So just because I think there's some confusion, but are you supportive of the tabling motion or not? I just because I think that might be helpful for the others as to where this is going.
I'm not in support of the tabling motion. I think we can do first and second reading, park it, and then we can carry on with short-term rentals.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to call a question on the tabling. So if you table it, then that means it's going to be held off to the next council meeting. Is that correct? And then we have to bring that back and deal with it.
Just for clarity, the motion was to table first and second reading until after the adoption of the short-term rentals.
Great. All right. Thank you for that clarification. All right. I'll call the question on the motion on the table.
Maybe I could ask, if we went that route, could we still achieve the November 23rd decision date?
No.
We can't. Okay.
If I may,
so I'm hearing staff are shaking their head no.
Okay, I question. I think it probably could be, but we'll take that at face value. Thank you.
Any other comments on the motion that are on the table? Okay, all those in favor of tabling the first and second reading of the zoning bylaw, please raise your hand. All those opposed? So the motion is defeated. Okay, so motion is defeated. Councillor Palmer was in favor. I want that to go on the record. Everyone else was opposed. So we're going to go back to the motion on the table, first and second reading. We've discussed this for an hour now around the table. Do we need to discuss it any further?
Mayor Sulz, I'll just make a last statement.
Sure.
At the risk of losing, the worst thing that could happen is defeating the first and second reading in my mind. And so weighing out that risk compared to the risk of some procedural corrections that we may need to do in the future, I will be voting in favor of first and second reading.
Your comments, Councillor Palmer. Okay, I will now ask the question. All in favor of first and second reading of zoning bylaw 2299? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Appreciate that, Council. Now.
So can I add something?
Yes.
If it's the procedural thing that we missed on this, then we should probably look at not wasting our time anymore, because it shouldn't have been a procedural error. We should have had this clear about how, or the procedural methodology we put in place. We should find a cleaner way to make things happen, so we don't need this roundabout.
Well, I think staff are trying to do that.
I think they had it figured out, and we just had to understand it. At least that was how it happened.
Well, right now we've sort of gone around the procedural norms.
Your Worship, just to say, it's complex. It's a complex thing you're doing. You're amending a major part of, taking a controversial issues, right? Short-term rentals everywhere in the province, and you're trying to figure that out while you're also knitting it into a zoning bylaw amendment that's trying to clean up an old broken down zoning bylaw. I can say that now that I'm leaving. It really was.
We all knew that.
We all knew that. It was a big surprise. So I think by nature it's complex, and it's still a work in progress, because you may find things out at the public hearing that you tweak or change as part of the whole process of either public hearing. So I think what staff laid out was a process how this could work, but everybody understands that once you start rolling through this, all kinds of things could. So I think you now have the maximum flexibility. If things go well and you guessed right on what the public wants, you could easily fit these pieces together. But you can't predict process and what the public will think of these. And as I said, short-term rentals is a complex, sometimes controversial thing, and it's kind of stuck in the middle. So I don't think there was an error. I think it was just very complicated. Staff suggested a path. Council's not, they want to be locked into that path. That's fine. I mean, I think there's ways around it. You're going to have to be flexible. You might not hit those dates anyways, because we don't know what the public's going to say yet.
Fair enough.
All right, so now we have item 9B2, public hearing be scheduled. Ms. Wade, any comments on that?
No, your worship.
Okay, so does someone want to put this motion on the table for me, Councilor Burksell?
Well, I'd be happier to make a motion that the public hearing be scheduled once the vacation rental bylaw has been adopted. So I'll make that motion, that a public hearing for zoning bylaw number 2299 be scheduled once the short-term vacation rental bylaw has been adopted.
In accordance with the requirements of local government.
Sure.
All right. I'm going to throw that in there anyway. So seconded for that motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Councilor Palmer is seconded. Any discussion on that motion?
Does that delay things?
Okay, we're going to ask that. Councilor Charlotte, you have your hand up, and then I'll go to Ms. Wade or Ms. Wood. Councilor Charlotte.
Yeah, maybe Ms. Wade was prepared to answer this already. I'm just concerned that there are legislative requirements on advertising for these public hearings, and that I would want to make sure that there's still enough time after the public hearing and the adoption to be able to do that.
So I'm going to go to Ms. Wade, Ms. Floyd, and then to Councilor Palmer.
Yep. There is requirements legislatively for notice periods, et cetera, which does impact schedule. And I'll go to Ms. Floyd. So we because it will cause some delays. Ms. Floyd?
Your worship, I believe that it depends on if, I think Councillor Palmer suggested a special meeting to adopt the short-term rental bylaw following the public hearing.
Yes.
If that was the case, legislatively, we require advertising no more than 10 days in advance, no less than 3. So we have to advertise twice in 2 consecutive versions of the newspaper, and they come out on the Wednesdays. Sorry, I don't have a November schedule or calendar here, but we probably, it would be tight to meet a November 23rd meeting, and it could probably push it to December, which would affect all of the other sequential public hearings that are in the queue.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councilor Palmer, and then Councilor Charlotte.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So there's 4 weeks, and so long as we're organized, actually, Mayor Sulz, if I may, just first of all, because it's just an ongoing thing, there was a motion put on the table, there was a seconder, and procedurally, this is a council meeting, and council those people should have an opportunity to speak to the motion. I think it would have mitigated some confusion. So it's just a procedural thing. And
all right.
Anyway, on the timeline, there is 4 weeks there. I think what Councillor Brooks Hill has suggested is a good idea, and it avoids the risk of going to the vacation rental or short-term rental amendments, in that we find out there needs to be some more work because what the public says, and having to repeal a scheduled public hearing. So by having that done and understanding the intent to try and hit the November 23rd, there is 1, 2, 3 Wednesdays. So there's 3 opportunities for the newspaper advertising. So that gives us a week flexibility on there. Staff will need to be organized to get it out right away, but they'll be having that placement. And I think that could potentially mitigate having to do some correction if the community takes us a different direction after first and second reading. And that's why I seconded the motion. Thank you, Mayor Sulz.
Thank you, Councilor Palmer. Appreciate that. Any other comments from councilors around the table regarding the motion on the table? Councilor Charlotte, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Your Worship. The other question I had was around the other pieces that would need to come forward as part of short-term rentals. There was the MCI business licensing and fees and charges, and would that all, so to be able to adopt that bylaw, we would also need to have those pieces in place. Is that correct?
Yes, you're muted, Ms. White.
Oh, yes, that is correct. And we've worked on those and we have the drafts, but they have to come in after the third reading of the short-term rental, and they'd be introduced in first, second, and third, and then they were going to come in with adoption of the short-term rental. That's basically how it was laid out.
Right. So the way I understand that, I don't know that this quick adoption of the short-term rentals is going to go as smoothly as has been proposed.
Yep. I think Mr. Simon wants to say something.
Simon, please go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship, to all of council. One item to consider as well with the implementation and rollout of short-term rentals, materials for the public to digest the changes and to go through the process. Staff are working on a lot of what we're calling implementation material, updates to business license application forms, process flow diagrams, so that there is clear communication to the public once these bylaw amendments are adopted. And the main focus has been to get them to a public hearing stage so that we're getting to the point that we're starting to understand what the final makeup of those bylaws will look like so that we can roll out all of this implementation material. And I just want council to be aware of that so that we are not rushing it. The whole intent of sequencing all of these, and I can appreciate the that it is a complex undertaking, but staff have taken the time to look at how they can be sequenced effectively with the short-term rental public hearing. Short-term rental already has first and second reading for the zoning bylaw amendments. We would then bring the zoning bylaw forward for a public hearing. It's gotten first and second reading now. We would then subsequently bring the short-term rental bylaw forward for third reading as amended with the new bylaw number. Zoning bylaw can get third reading hopefully at the public hearing stage. Zoning bylaw is adopted. Short-term rental is adopted after that and is the first bylaw to be amended into the zoning bylaw. That would give staff the time that we need to prepare these implementation materials. It would give staff the time we need to prepare the other three subsequent supporting bylaws. I can definitely appreciate it as a complex undertaking, but staff have identified this as the most appropriate way to go forward while still giving the public the opportunity to comment on these two very important pieces independently of each other. And as Mr. Brooks has indicated, staff are very, very confident that this would satisfy our obligations under the Local Government Act to ensure robust public participation as part of the consideration of these bylaws.
Thank you for that. Councilor Palmer.
Sorry about that. Having trouble unmuting. Thank you, Mayor Sulz. What Mr. Simon just laid out, that sequencing where you have the date and that clarity on a very, point by point, not paragraph. I think that would be very useful to have that produced and sent to council, or maybe put on the Talk Revelstoke sites as well, because that sequencing, that was easy, probably the easiest one for me to follow the way you articulated that. I do have a question on that, in that I may have missed what right at the end. Did I hear you say that we would be amending the new the new zoning bylaw, the repeal and replace the new zoning bylaw? You said the first amendment?
Through your worship, to Councillor Palmer, it would essentially be the first amendment to bylaw 2299 to embed the short-term rental regulations. That was the sequencing of how we had envisioned it, because basically when the short-term rentals would come back for third reading as amended, the only as amended portion is updating the bylaw reference number. The zoning bylaw 2299 in its current form, as council is seeing it and as it would be presented at the public hearing, would be considered for third reading and then ultimately adoption. And then subsequently after that, the short-term rental regulations would be amended into bylaw 2299.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Thank you, Mayor Sulz.
Okay. So now we have a motion on the table to wait for public hearing on the zoning bylaw until the short-term rental is adopted. My question is, are we going to be short-circuiting what the sequences are for development services by voting in favor of that rather than putting a date And so I'm going to staff for that comment.
Through your worship, Mr. Simon, do you want to respond to the mayor on that?
To your worship, yes, in my opinion, that would definitely be painting us into a bit of a box because, again, if the short-term rentals move forward and the zoning bylaw can't go ahead until the short-term rental is adopted, that could, significantly delay when zoning bylaw is ultimately brought forward for a public hearing. And as Ms. Wade has indicated, these are amendments that, in our experience, the community is looking for. And in addition to the major content changes that council's seeing, I think it's very important to understand the positive impact that this will have on the development services group, from everything processing business licenses to building permits for minor projections into setbacks. It will just provide abundant clarity and really, really help streamline our day-to-day workload, which also helps the community and the public when they're going through application processes. So there's a lot of good things that are embedded into the zoning bylaw, and I'd hate to see it delayed further because of some procedural items that can most definitely be worked out through this process.
Any comments from councillors around the table? I'm kind of in support of us having a date and moving that forward. Any comment?
No, Your Worship, but if council is worried about matching it, you may want to leave it open. Just don't set the date today, but you can readjust that at the next meeting. I mean, that's that way you're not doing it, or you can set the date and then take the chance that it all fits into place. It's really what council's comfortable with. By pegging it to the completion of the short-term rental, that may now lock you into some advertising problems. Again, it's I'm not certainly not Mr. Simon outlined the clearer side of it so far today, and why council may want to go forward. So, set a date if you want to certain. You can still change the date, or don't set a date, but at least let this go another week or two and see if some of those things start, happening for you.
Okay. Any comments, Councillor Elliott? Any comments?
I guess we won't be adopting the zoning bylaw changes until the short-term rentals are correct or aligned.
Yes.
So it really doesn't matter. So the 23rd is just a number. And if we haven't resolved the short-term vacation rentals by then it doesn't make a difference. Yeah. So I'm good for setting a date. And,
okay. Right now the motion on the table is not to set a date until
I'd be going for the date.
Okay. Councillor Brooks Hill, you made that motion. Any thoughts, any changes? You're okay with what you got?
After having listened to Mr. Simon, I finally understand the reason behind the sequencing. However, as Mr. Mattiussi suggested, I'd be happy with just not setting a date or not locking ourselves into anything. So just basically doing nothing.
And then at the next meeting, we can revisit this if we need to, depending on what's happening. Okay, Councillor Ryan, any comment?
No.
Okay, Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up, and then I'll go to Councillor Sherwood.
So Mayor Sulz, if the Councillor Brooks Hill is wanting to withdraw the motion, I would support it, the withdrawal of the motion. If that's helpful, if it's helpful.
He would like to withdraw.
I concur.
Okay, so then we're going to go back to I'm going to go to Councillor Sherwood. Any comments on withdrawal of this motion, which means that we're waiting until after everything is finalized with short-term rental? No comments? Okay, good. All right, so there is another motion here. The public hearing for zoning bylaw be scheduled for November 23rd. Does someone want to make that motion? Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on setting that date? I know that we've discussed this around the table several times. Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the public hearing for November 23rd? Okay, and opposed? So I have Councillor Palmer, do you have your hand up one way or the other? Want to make comment?
Yeah, if absence of my hand, it's a positive vote.
Okay,
I will go in support of the motion. I'll just support the motion.
Okay, and then opposed again. No, Councillor Brooks Hill is opposed, even though he moved the motion. No, you didn't. Sorry, my apologies. Okay, motion is adopted
Mayor Sulz, if I may, sorry, I'm doing a Councillor Elliott stunt here. So on the motion that we just passed, I understood we were not, and that was on the basis of supporting the withdrawal of the motion. So with Councillor Brooks Hill voting against that motion, was that your understanding of the withdrawal, that we would not set a specific date until next council meeting?
my understanding of the withdrawal is that we would set. Okay. Did I understand that wrong?
Councillor Brooks Hill?
Okay.
My understanding was that I was withdrawing the motion, and then subsequently there was another motion made, not the motion I would have made.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay, correct. Thanks. That's just clear. Yeah, it's a little confusion thing. And in hindsight, I would have voted against it. That's fine.
All right.
We'll move on.
Good. All right, thank you. We're going to move on. Thank you. Thank you, staff. We're going to move on to item 9C, permissive tax exemption bylaw. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Brooks Hill.
The 2022 property tax exemption bylaw number 2304 be read a first, second, and third time.
It's a seconder for that motion, please, Councillor Elliott. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? I think we've discussed this several times. Any comment, Ms. McCabe?
No, Your Worship. It was discussed at the Finance Committee meeting, and they've recommended this coming forward. The one change since that meeting is that we have removed one of the properties that was originally proposed to be on it because that tenant at the courthouse is not renewing their lease.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right, let's move on to communications. Any comments on Heritage Advisory Commission meeting minutes? Seeing none, moving on to Economic Development Commission meeting minutes. Seeing none, UBCM, we're going to go on. I've got a few things that I want to speak to, and I think maybe Councillor Charlotte and Councillor Palmer may have a few things. And so as I go through, councillors, you were with me on the calls that we made with the ministers, and so I'll just preface these calls, and if you want to weigh in, by all means. So our first call was with Minister of Environment, George Heyman, and we discussed again conservation officer for Revelstoke. We were told, as what we've known before, that our conservation officer, or one of the major conservation officers who come to Revelstoke are based in Golden, they're now stationed in pairs. They don't feel that we have the call number here to station two other people, but they're always deficient in staff to be able to provide that. So it's always a concern for us. However, they did comment that we'd asked about education, improved education, especially with Bear Aware, and lots of new residents moving in, and asked if they could do that. They would suggest that the sergeant that's stationed in Golden come to Revelstoke for that purpose. So any comments, Councillor Charlotte or Councillor Palmer, regarding our conversation with Minister Heyman? Nothing further, Councillor Palmer?
No, I was at that call. I mostly listened in, and it's pretty clear that there won't be another conservation officer in Revelstoke in the near future.
Great. Thank you for your comments. Our second call was with MOTI, Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure, actually with their staff. And I'd asked for the minister or the meeting to be with the staff because in past, that's actually how we've been able to get things done. They were very good. So the staff were mostly based in Kamloops and Cranbrook. So Highways is doing a traffic impact study for the whole area in regard to traffic to see if there are things that we need to do or they need to do as we move forward. We spoke about twinning of the Trans-Canada Highway. Their statement was that's going to be at least 20 years out. So we need to be cognizant of that fact. They are doing some work, talking about doing work at Three Valley Gap. They're actually doing that now as we speak. So cleaning up the netting that is there. They were talking about bringing down 1,000 tons of rock from Three Valley and increasing the number of nets coming east. And so they're doing that work at present time. So that's definitely in the works. And then I'm well aware in my conversations with staff and previous about our Oak Drive intersection, that's at Johnson Heights. And not talking, we'll never see a light there at this point. However, because of the way the highway is configured and the corners and that sort of thing. So we talked a little bit about them looking into acceleration and deceleration lanes. So a turning lane in as you're coming from the east, and then an acceleration lane. So those who are in Johnson Heights, as they're coming out, they have a separate lane to accelerate into, or at least get into the queue to leave. So there seems to be enough room there in my mind. They didn't state that from their perspective, but they're willing to look at that sort of thing. And part of their traffic impact study would incorporate that. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Any comments from Councillor Charlotte or Palmer regarding that conversation? Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I did pose the question to the staff regarding a promise made by the province 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, that the twinning of the Trans-Canada would be done within 10 years. And the staff said, well, so that 10 years has already gone by. And they said, well, no, won't happen in the next 10, could be another 20. I will note, however, having traveled from Revelstoke to Calgary today, that there is significant work that continues, and that's great that we're seeing improvements. It's not great that have delays, but it's great to see the work is proceeding. Thank you, Mayor Sulz.
Great, thank you, Councillor Palmer. I appreciate that very much. So in the last 2 years, I've taken a drive with our manager, our previous manager of MOTI from Cranbrook. He's since moved to Kamloops, Ron, but he took me out and with staff. And in my other world, I know where the accident zones are and that sort of thing. And they actually addressed a lot of those areas with increased signage and increased ways of mitigating things and making it look like roads are narrow, which actually slows traffic down. And so I know from a fatality perspective it has helped. So that's been a great thing. So appreciate the fact that they're always willing to listen to what we have to say. We had another conversation with the ministry. Go ahead.
Just on the crunch spot, the one Three Valley Gap seems to be a real problem.
Right.
Did they give you any indication when that might be? I mean, that's part of the twinning process, and there's probably needs tunneling or something, or a roof.
Yeah, we didn't even discuss that sort of issue right now. It's what can they do to mitigate, to keep people safe as they go through at this point. Because to be quite honest, I don't know whether their engineers have ever looked at what the options will be long-term. If they have looked at that, they sure haven't spoken about it publicly. And so we've seen them spend millions of dollars in the avalanche stuff. And so seeing some sort of put a tunnel over it, or if you were in Italy, we'd be drilling through that mountain and away we go. We did discuss it.
The other thing that related to that is that I've been driving quite extensively back and forth from Sycamore area.
Yeah.
I see a lot of rock on the road, and it's intimidating. You drive by that cliff, and I say, "My God, there's a lot of rock hanging above your head." And I'm saying that there's been a rock there for a month. I'm just curious what is their removal process?
Well, they're in there now, they're
Yeah, I
working
know.
in there now, I don't know what the removal process is. We go through the same thing, I've had family members go through, hit rocks, blow tires, I've had a friend go through and have a rock go through the roof. And of course, you know, we all know about Mrs. Smith going through the brand new car and almost losing her life. And it's because of that we've actually seen extra work, sadly, because of that, we've seen extra work being done. So they haven't really discussed anything further other than enhancing what they're doing with their current mitigation plan. So that's kind of where we're at. All right, we spoke with the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation. That's a mouthful. I think it was a deputy, assistant deputy minister that we spoke to, and we spoke to them about our issue with gravel pits and aggregate. So only the minister can address future aggregate needs. So we're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen there. I was concerned about some of the gravel pits that have been decommissioned now in reclamation process. And so they enhance their reclamation bond so that they can ensure that reclamation will be done on some of these things. And so I'm going to go to, again, to Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Palmer. Any comments on the conversation? I know that that you both asked some questions, but any comments? Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, and we had a good conversation around looking at that long-term picture so that we could have an overarching, that we need some kind of a strategy and an understanding of what our actual needs are for aggregate. So hopefully we see that coming forward. I believe it should be part of the process with applications. So we'll see what we end up getting out of that. But we had a good discussion about it.
Councillor Palmer, any comment?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Yeah, further to Councillor Charlotte, that's correct. We brought up the idea of a master plan, essentially a master plan, an aggregate master plan for that side, recognizing our needs, but instead of having this ad hoc approach that's not in the community interests. I think our meeting had started off a little bit rocky because it was this thing that we need aggregates, and even the Green Party that ride their bikes on aggregate services, I think was one of the comments made. However, it did come along and saying, okay, yes, we need aggregates. We build houses, we build sidewalks, we build roads. However, the whole ad hoc approach to gravel extraction in our area, including the Area B, is not in the interests of the community and is damaging some of the long-term values that we have. And so the ministry indicated that they were open to the idea of a possible master plan. They indicated that there is this kind of thing has been done in the Lower Mainland, and I believe, Mayor Sulz, that we were going to follow up or have staff follow up on that process. So I look forward to hearing how that goes ahead. The other point that I'll make is that I asked a question about the Section 17 currently underway. I believe that's under another ministry. However, they were unaware of that, and I find that a little bit alarming. And I don't know if there's any update from staff on the Section 17 or if that's a dialogue for another time, but it was a little bit alarming that the province, knowing that we had this meeting, that they didn't seem to know anything about it.
I think I would like to have that conversation at another time and go into it just a little bit deeper, and then talk about some of the other things regarding that, if that's okay.
Yeah, so long as we don't lose our radar on that, and time's gone by, and so that'd be great to pick that up. Perhaps we can have it on the agenda for next council meeting, or something like that.
Yeah, we're going to try and move that forward quickly. So I've got a couple other things. I just want to basically say I had a conversation with Minister David Eby, Solicitor General, Minister of Housing. We talked about BC housing, staff housing, workforce housing, and talked to that. I'll talk at length again about that at another time. And then just to blow our own horn, also during UBCM, our own economic development coordinator Ingrid Braun spoke about Indigenous collaboration and that sort of thing. I will go into that again at another time, but definitely we are being seen as moving things forward in the world, definitely in the province of BC. So. I'd like to move on, and so Ms. Rousseau, Ms. Floyd, do we have any questions from the press?
Mayor Sulz?
Yes, go ahead, Councilor.
We also, did you mention the foreign worker, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs?
I forgot about that. Yeah, the foreign worker program. So we spoke with them as well, and they were going to get us some more information, and so that we could get that to our community. Any other comments on that, Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, they're outside the. They don't have the mandate of the foreign worker program directly, whether people get into the country or not, but they seem to be working hard to liaise with the federal government. I was pleased that they took our comments about the concerns of lack of ability to retain foreign workers, and also some examples of people that are currently in Revelstoke wanting to work but are having trouble getting their working visas, and that they did some follow-up on that. So it's a little light there, but I just like to acknowledge the work the provincial staff did there. Thank you, Mayor Sulz.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. I appreciate that. All right, and seeing no questions from the press, I would like to go in camera pursuant to 90.1A and K of the community charter. Someone,
Gary, just regarding the communications, we had a letter from the minutes from the Heritage Committee and the Economic, but is that enough? I've been sort of asking some actionable items to come from the various committees.
So neither one of them came up with.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if the message is getting from us to them that we want some directives. We want to move things, and if they're the ones that are supposed to be in tune with that particular area, they're the ones that should be bringing the recommendations forward. And once they get to us, we can enact them, but they should be feeding us.
Okay, and that's good. Definitely, because I sit on the Economic Development Group, they are a think tank and they're quite prepared to do that.
I mean, we've been begging for this for some time, and I think it's time to get this regularly on our agenda.
All right, good. I'll deal with that. Thanks. All right, so somebody make a motion to go in camera. Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. We